The frozen breath of the Colorado wind cut through Benjamin Ryder's wool coat as his horse picked its way through the snowdrifts on the trail between Fort Lyon and the scattered homesteads to the north. And that was when he saw her, a dark shape huddled against a cottonwood tree, her arms wrapped around something he could not yet make out. He urged his mare forward, his heart hammering against his ribs when he realized the shape was a woman, her lips blue with cold, her eyes barely open, and in her arms, wrapped in what looked like every scrap of cloth she owned, was a tiny baby. "Madam," Benjamin said, swinging down from his horse and dropping to his knees beside her. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyes focused on him with difficulty, and he could see the terror there, the desperate maternal instinct that kept her conscious even as hypothermia threatened to drag her under. "My baby," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Please, my baby." Benjamin did not hesitate. He stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around both of them, then lifted the woman into his arms, baby and all. She weighed almost nothing, and he wondered how long she had been out here, how far she had walked. "I have got you," he said firmly. "Both of you. You are going to be all right." His homestead was only a mile back, thank God. He settled the woman across his saddle, keeping one arm around her to hold her steady as he led the horse on foot through the deepening snow. The baby made a weak mewling sound, and the woman's grip tightened protectively, even in her weakened state. January in Colorado was no time to be out without proper shelter, and Benjamin sent up a silent prayer of thanks that he had decided to ride out this morning to check his trap lines. The cabin came into view, smoke still rising from the chimney from the fire he had banked before leaving. Benjamin kicked the door open and carried his burden straight to the bed in the corner, laying the woman down gently and pulling every blanket he owned over her. The baby was still wrapped in her arms, and he carefully began to unwrap the layers to check on the infant. "No," the woman gasped, trying to hold on tighter. "I need to make sure the baby is all right," Benjamin said gently. "I promise I will give him right back." "Her," the woman whispered. "Her name is Sarah." Benjamin nodded and carefully extracted the infant. She was perhaps 3 months old, he guessed, with a tuft of dark hair and skin that was far too pale. He checked her over quickly, relieved to find her breathing steady, then wrapped her in one of his own flannel shirts before returning her to her mother's arms. "She seems all right." "Cold, but all right." He built up the fire until it roared in the hearth, then heated water and brought the woman a cup of weak broth from the pot he kept simmering. She managed a few sips before her eyes closed again, exhaustion claiming her. Benjamin sat in the chair beside the bed and waited, watching the color slowly return to her face as the warmth of the cabin did its work. It was near evening when she woke again. The light slanting through the window had turned gold, and Benjamin had lit the lantern on the table. He was mending a harness when her eyes opened, and she looked around the cabin with confusion before her gaze settled on him. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "My cabin, about 6 miles north of Fort Lyon," Benjamin said, setting aside his work. "I found you on the trail this morning." You were half frozen. She looked down at the baby sleeping in her arms, and relief flooded her features. "Sarah, she is all right. She seems to be. Tough little thing." Benjamin stood and brought her another cup of broth. "What is your name, madam?" "And what in God's name were you doing out there?" She took the cup with shaking hands. "Grace," she said. "Grace Owens. I was trying to reach Fort Lyon, but I got turned around in the storm yesterday. I walked all night." "Walked from where?" Grace's eyes filled with tears and she looked away. "From the homestead. My husband's homestead. But he is dead now, 3 weeks dead of pneumonia, and his brother came and said the land was his and I had to leave." Benjamin felt anger kindle in his chest. "He turned you out with a baby, in the middle of winter." "He said I had no claim to the land, said I should go back east to my family, but my family is all dead too. That is why I married Thomas in the first place, through a letter. I came out here last spring." She took a shaky breath. "I just needed to get to Fort Lyon. I thought perhaps I could find work or someone who would help." "You found someone," Benjamin said firmly. The words came out before he had fully thought them through, but once he said them, he knew they were right. "You can stay here, both of you." Grace stared at him. "I cannot ask that of you. You do not even know me. I know you walked through a blizzard to keep your baby safe. I know you nearly died protecting her." Benjamin pulled his chair closer to the bed. "I've got this cabin and 160 acres of good land. I run cattle and trap in the winter. It is a decent living, but it is lonely work. I could use help and you need a place to stay. Seems to me we could help each other." "I will work," Grace said quickly. "I can cook and clean and help with whatever you need. I will earn my keep." Benjamin shook his head. "That is not what I am saying." He took a deep breath, knowing he was about to make a decision that would change everything, but feeling more certain of it with every passing moment. "I am saying I will marry you, make it legal and proper. I will be father to Sarah and husband to you both if you will have me." The words hung in the air between them. Grace's eyes were wide with shock, and Benjamin rushed on before she could refuse. "I know it is fast. I know you do not know me from Adam. But out here, things are different. You need protection, a name, a home. I can give you those things. And I give you my word I will treat you with respect and kindness. I will not force anything on you. We can take whatever time you need." Grace was silent for a long moment, studying his face. Benjamin let her look, knowing she needed to see the truth in his eyes. He was 32 years old, had been in Colorado for 8 years, and had long since given up hope of finding a wife out here where women were scarce and the work was hard. But looking at this young woman with her fierce maternal love and quiet strength, he felt something shift in his chest, something that felt like the beginning of hope. "Why?" Grace finally asked. "Why would you do this for strangers?" "Because I know what it is like to be alone," Benjamin said simply. "I know what it is like to need help and have nowhere to turn. And because when I saw you out there, I knew I could not just walk away. Maybe it is fate, maybe it is just luck, but I think we crossed paths for a reason." Grace looked down at Sarah, who was beginning to stir, making small, hungry sounds. "I need to feed her," she said quietly. Benjamin stood immediately. "I will step outside, give you some privacy." He pulled on his coat and went out into the cold, giving her time. The sun was setting over the snow-covered plains, painting everything pink and gold. His breath misted in the frigid air as he checked on his horse and the few cattle in the nearby pen. His mind was racing with everything that needed to be done. They would need to go into Fort Lyon as soon as Grace was strong enough, make the marriage legal, let folks know she was under his protection. He would need to buy supplies for the baby, proper clothes for Grace, more food to feed 3 instead of 1. It was overwhelming, but beneath the practical concerns was a strange sense of rightness. He had been alone for so long, had convinced himself he preferred it that way. But having people in his cabin, hearing the soft sounds of a woman's voice and a baby's cry, made him realize just how empty his life had become. When he went back inside, Grace had finished nursing Sarah and was sitting up in bed, looking stronger already. "I will marry you," she said without preamble. "But I need you to understand something. I loved my husband. I know we only had a few months together, but I cared for him. I cannot promise I will ever feel that way about you." Benjamin nodded. "I understand. I am not asking for love, Grace. I am asking for partnership. If love comes, then we will be blessed. If not, we will still have a good life together. I promise you that." "Then yes," Grace said softly. I will marry you, Benjamin Ryder, and I will do my best to be a good wife to you." Benjamin felt something warm spread through his chest. "Rest now. Get your strength back. We will go into Fort Lyon in a few days and make it official." Over the next 3 days, Benjamin watched Grace slowly recover. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 23 or 24, with dark blonde hair and green eyes that held both sadness and determination. She insisted on helping around the cabin despite his protests, making meals and tidying up while Sarah slept in a makeshift cradle Benjamin fashioned from an old crate lined with blankets. They talked in the evenings, sitting by the fire while Grace nursed Sarah or rocked her to sleep. Benjamin learned that Grace had grown up in Ohio, the daughter of a school teacher who died of cholera when she was 17. Her mother had passed when she was just a child. She had worked as a seamstress for a few years before answering Thomas Owen's advertisement for a bride. She had traveled to Colorado full of hope, had married Thomas within a week of arriving, and had been happy in their small way despite the hardships of homestead life. "He was a good man," Grace said one evening, her voice soft. "Not romantic or passionate, but kind. He worked hard. When I realized I was expecting Sarah, he was so happy, but the land was difficult and he worked himself too hard trying to prove up the claim. When he got sick, there was no doctor close enough, and it just took him so fast." "I am sorry," Benjamin said, and he meant it. "No one should have to go through that alone." "His brother arrived a week after the funeral," Grace continued. "Said Thomas had borrowed money from him to file the claim, and since Thomas was dead, the debt and the land reverted to him. He gave me 2 days to pack up and leave. I tried to argue, but he said if I did not go, he would bring the sheriff, so I took what I could carry and started walking." Benjamin's jaw tightened. "What is the brother's name?" "Why?" Grace asked, alarmed. "Because what he did was wrong. A man does not turn out a widow and a baby, no matter what the law says about property." "Please do not make trouble," Grace said. "I just want to move forward. I just want Sarah to be safe." Benjamin nodded slowly. "All right, but know that once we are married, you are under my protection. No one will treat you that way again." On the 4th day, the weather cleared enough for them to make the trip to Fort Lyon. Benjamin drove the wagon while Grace sat beside him, holding Sarah wrapped in every warm thing they could find. The town was small but bustling, having been established near the old Bent's Fort trading post. Soldiers from the fort mingled with ranchers, trappers, and the occasional group of traders heading further west. Benjamin drove straight to the church, a small wooden building that also served as the town meeting hall. Reverend Patterson was a practical man who had seen enough of frontier life to not ask too many questions when Benjamin explained the situation. "I will need a witness," the Reverend said. "I will fetch Doc Brennan," Benjamin replied. "He knows me, can vouch for my character." The doctor came willingly, a gruff older man who examined Sarah with gentle hands and pronounced her healthy before standing up beside them as they said their vows. Grace's voice was steady as she promised to honor and cherish Benjamin, and his own voice did not waver as he vowed to protect and provide for her and Sarah both. The Reverend pronounced them man and wife, and Benjamin found himself married to a woman he had known for less than a week. But when Grace looked up at him, something passed between them that felt like the beginning of trust, and Benjamin thought that was a foundation they could build on. They went to the general store next, where Benjamin bought supplies with the money he had saved from selling his furs. Cloth for diapers, warm clothes for Grace, flour and sugar and coffee, and a proper cradle for Sarah. The storekeeper's wife, Mrs. Henderson, clucked over the baby and welcomed Grace warmly, and Benjamin could see some of the tension leave his new wife's shoulders at this acceptance. News traveled fast in a small town. By the time they were ready to head back to the cabin, half the town seemed to know about the marriage. Most folks were friendly, understanding that frontier life sometimes required quick decisions. A few of the older women looked scandalized, but Benjamin did not care. He had done right by Grace and Sarah, and that was all that mattered. The ride back to the cabin was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Sarah slept the whole way, worn out by the excitement and the cold air. When they arrived home, Benjamin carried the supplies inside while Grace settled the baby in the new cradle. "Benjamin," she said softly as he set down the last box. He turned to find her standing by the fire, her hands clasped in front of her. "I want you to know I am grateful," she said. "I know this is not what you planned for your life, taking on a widow and another man's child, but I will do everything I can to make sure you do not regret it." Benjamin crossed the room to stand in front of her. "Grace, I need you to understand something. When I said I would be father and husband both, I meant it. Sarah is my daughter now in the eyes of God and the law, and you are my wife. This is not charity, this is family." Grace's eyes filled with tears and she nodded. "Family," she repeated softly. The winter months that followed were a time of adjustment. Benjamin and Grace learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small domestic details that make up a life together. Grace proved to be an excellent cook, making even their simple provisions into satisfying meals. She kept the cabin clean and warm, and in the evenings, she would mend their clothes or knit by the fire while Benjamin carved or read aloud from the few books he owned. Sarah was an easy baby, quick to smile and rarely fussy. Benjamin found himself enchanted by her, by the way she watched him with curious eyes, the way she laughed when he made funny faces. He would hold her in the evenings, walking back and forth across the cabin to soothe her to sleep, and feel a fierce, protective love growing in his heart. With Grace, things were more complicated. Benjamin was deeply aware that she was still grieving her first husband, still processing all the trauma she had endured. He kept his promise to give her space and time, sleeping on a bedroll by the fire while she had the bed to herself. They were unfailingly polite to each other, careful and considerate, but there was a distance between them that Benjamin did not know how to bridge. He found himself watching her when she was not looking, noticing the way the firelight caught in her hair, the way she hummed softly to Sarah when she rocked her. He noticed how hard she worked, how she never complained even when the isolation and the cold wore on both of them. He noticed the sadness in her eyes when she thought no one was watching, and he wished he knew how to ease it. February brought more snow and bitter cold. Benjamin spent his days checking his trap lines and tending to the cattle, coming home half frozen to find Grace waiting with hot coffee and warm food. One evening, he came in to find her crying quietly by the fire, Sarah asleep in her cradle. "Grace," he was at her side in an instant. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, wiping at her tears. "I am sorry. I do not mean to be foolish. It is just today would have been Thomas's birthday. And I was thinking about how he never got to see Sarah smile, never got to watch her grow, and I feel guilty. Guilty." Benjamin sat down beside her. "Why guilty?" "Because I am here, safe and warm, with a good man who treats me kindly. And Thomas is in the cold ground. It feels wrong to be grateful when he lost everything." Benjamin was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Grace, Thomas would want you to be safe, would want his daughter to be cared for. You have not betrayed him by surviving." "I know that in my head," Grace whispered, "but my heart is all tangled up." Benjamin reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. "Then take your time untangling it. I am not going anywhere." Grace looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. "You are a good man, Benjamin Ryder, better than I deserve." "That is not true," Benjamin said firmly. You deserve every good thing, Grace. And I hope in time you will believe that." Something shifted between them after that night. Grace seemed less guarded, more willing to let Benjamin see her real feelings. They began to talk more deeply, sharing stories from their pasts, their hopes for the future. Benjamin told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west after his parents died, about the loneliness of carving out a life in the wilderness. Grace spoke about her childhood, about the mother she barely remembered and the father who had tried his best to raise her alone. As the weeks passed, Benjamin found himself falling in love with his wife. It happened gradually, in small moments. The way she laughed at something Sarah did, the way she touched his arm when she wanted his attention, the way she had started saying "our home" instead of "your cabin." He did not tell her, afraid of pressuring her, but the feelings grew stronger every day. March brought the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt, and Benjamin started preparing for the planting season. Grace helped him plan the garden, excited at the prospect of fresh vegetables. They worked together to repair the chicken coop that had been damaged in the winter storms, and Benjamin bought 6 hens from a neighbor so they would have eggs. One evening, as they were washing up after supper, Grace suddenly said, "Benjamin, I have been thinking." He looked over at her, hands still in the dishwater. "About what?" She took a deep breath. "About us. About this marriage. You have been so patient with me, giving me time to grieve and adjust. But it has been almost 3 months now, and I think it is time we talked about what kind of marriage we want this to be." Benjamin's heart began to pound. "What do you want, Grace?" She turned to face him fully, her green eyes serious. "I want a real marriage. I want to be a true wife to you. Not just because I am grateful, though I am, but because I have come to care for you, to respect you, to feel safe with you in a way I never expected to feel again." Benjamin dried his hands slowly, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Are you certain? I do not want you to feel obligated." "I am certain," Grace said. "I will not lie and say I am in love with you, not yet, but I think I could be if you are patient with me a little longer. I think what we have is worth building on." Benjamin crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands. "I am already in love with you," he said quietly. "I have been for weeks now, but I was afraid to tell you, afraid of scaring you away." Grace's eyes widened. "Truly, truly. I love you, Grace. I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you care for Sarah, the way you have made this cabin into a home. I love your laugh and your stubbornness and the way you sing when you think I cannot hear. I love everything about you." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Kiss me," she whispered. Benjamin lowered his head and kissed her softly, gently, giving her time to respond. When she did, rising up on her toes and wrapping her arms around his neck, he felt like the luckiest man alive. The kiss deepened, and Benjamin poured all his love and hope into it, trying to show her without words how much she meant to him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace rested her forehead against his. "I want to be a real wife to you tonight," she said. Benjamin pulled back to look at her. "Only if you are ready. I can wait as long as you need." "I am ready," Grace said firmly. "I want this. I want you." That night they came together as husband and wife in truth. Benjamin was gentle and patient, determined to make Grace feel cherished and loved. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the bed that had been his alone for so long, Grace traced patterns on his chest and said softly, "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me time. For not demanding your rights as a husband. For letting me come to you when I was ready." Benjamin kissed the top of her head. "I want you to be happy, Grace. That is all I have ever wanted." "I am happy," she said, and he could hear the wonder in her voice. "I did not think I would ever be happy again, but I am." Spring turned into summer, and their life together settled into a comfortable rhythm. Benjamin planted crops while Grace tended the garden and the chickens. Sarah grew rapidly, learning to roll over and then to sit up, delighting them both with her progress. They had neighbors over for Sunday dinners, and Grace quickly became known in the community as a skilled baker, her pies and bread in high demand. Benjamin's cattle business prospered, and he was able to buy more stock. He built a proper barn and expanded the house, adding another bedroom for Sarah and a small parlor where Grace could entertain visitors. The homestead began to look less like a bachelor's rough camp and more like a real family home. And through it all, Benjamin and Grace grew closer. They learned to read each other's moods and needs, to work together as true partners. Grace's grief for Thomas did not disappear, but it became softer, less sharp. She spoke about him sometimes, usually when Sarah did something new, wishing he could see her. Benjamin encouraged this, never wanting Grace to feel she had to erase her past to make room for their present. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while Sarah played at their feet, Grace reached for Benjamin's hand. "I need to tell you something," she said. Benjamin looked at her, noting the mixture of nervousness and joy in her expression. "What is it?" "I am with child," Grace said softly. "I am certain now. Our baby will be born sometime in the winter, I think." Benjamin felt pure joy flood through him. He swept Grace into his arms, kissing her soundly while Sarah squealed with delight at their antics. "That is wonderful news," he said when he finally set her down. "Are you happy about it?" "I am," Grace said, and he could see she meant it. "I will admit, I was nervous at first. But I want this baby. I want to have a child with you to grow our family." "We will need to expand the house more," Benjamin said, his mind already racing with plans. "And we should get a better stove for the winter. I want you to be comfortable." Grace laughed. "I am tough, Benjamin. I survived a blizzard, remember. I can handle a Colorado winter." "I know you can," Benjamin said, pulling her close again. "But that does not mean I will not do everything in my power to make it easier for you." As summer faded into autumn, Benjamin worked tirelessly to prepare for the new baby. He built beautiful wooden furniture for the nursery, a cradle that rocked and a chest for clothes. Grace sewed tiny garments and knitted soft blankets, her face glowing with happiness and health. Sarah was walking now, toddling around the house and getting into everything. She had started calling Benjamin Papa, and every time she said it, his heart swelled with love. She had no memory of Thomas, would never know him except through the stories they would tell her, but Benjamin hoped that was all right. He hoped he was doing right by the man who had given her life, by raising her with love and care. In October, Benjamin's cattle brought a good price at market, and he used the money to buy supplies for the winter and a beautiful bolt of fabric for Grace. She used it to make a dress for herself, the first new dress she had owned in years, and when she put it on for church on Sunday, Benjamin thought she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "You are staring," Grace whispered to him during the sermon. "I cannot help it," Benjamin whispered back. "You are stunning." Grace blushed and looked down at her hands, a small smile playing on her lips. Benjamin reached over and took her hand, threading their fingers together. It was a simple gesture, one they had done 1,000 times, but in that moment, Benjamin felt the full weight of his love for her, his gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her into his life. Winter came early that year, with snow falling in November. Grace's belly had grown large and she moved more slowly now, Sarah toddling at her side. Benjamin hovered over her constantly, worried she was doing too much, but Grace just laughed and told him to stop fussing. "Women have been having babies for thousands of years," she reminded him. "I will be fine. Humor me," Benjamin said. "You are my whole world, Grace, you and the girls." "Girls?" Grace raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think this baby is a girl?" "I do not know," Benjamin admitted. "Just a feeling, but boy or girl, it does not matter to me, as long as you are both healthy." The baby came on a frigid night in January, almost exactly a year after Benjamin had found Grace in the snow. Mrs. Henderson came to help with the birthing, along with Doc Brennan, and Benjamin paced outside in the cold, unable to stay in the cabin and listen to Grace's cries of pain. It was the longest night of his life. He prayed harder than he had ever prayed, begging God to keep Grace safe, to let everything go well. He thought about losing her, about being left alone with two small children, and the fear nearly choked him. But when dawn broke, Mrs. Henderson came to the door with a smile on her face. "You have a son," she said, "strong and healthy with a good set of lungs, and your wife is tired but doing well." Benjamin rushed inside to find Grace propped up in bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. Sarah was curled up next to her, asleep despite the commotion. Grace looked exhausted, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, but her smile was radiant. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Benjamin approached the bed carefully, as if he were in the presence of something holy. Grace pulled back the blanket to reveal a red, wrinkled face, eyes squinted shut, a tiny mouth working reflexively. "He is perfect," Benjamin breathed. "I want to name him after you," Grace said. "If that is all right." "Benjamin Ryder, Jr." Benjamin felt tears prick his eyes. "Are you certain?" "We could name him after your father or Thomas." Grace shook her head. "You are his father, Benjamin. You are the father to both our children. That is what I want to honor." Benjamin sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped his arm around Grace, looking down at his son, his daughter, his wife. "I love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love all of you so much." "We love you too," Grace said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You saved us, Benjamin. You gave us a life when we had nothing. I will never forget that." "You saved me too," Benjamin said. "I was just existing before you came. Now I am living." The next few months were exhausting but joyful. Baby Benjamin, whom they called Benji to avoid confusion, was a fussy infant, nothing like Sarah had been. He demanded to be fed constantly and slept only in short bursts, leaving both Benjamin and Grace bleary-eyed and stumbling. But even in their exhaustion, they were happy. Sarah adjusted well to being a big sister, though she was sometimes jealous of the attention Benji received. Benjamin made sure to spend special time with her, taking her with him to do chores, letting her help with simple tasks, reading to her every night before bed. He wanted her to know she was just as loved, just as important. As spring arrived and the snow melted away, life became easier. Benji grew into a happy, chubby baby who smiled at everything. Sarah, now 2 years old, was talking in full sentences and had boundless energy. Grace regained her strength and was soon back to her normal activities, though Benjamin noticed she got tired more easily than before. "I am not as young as I was with Sarah," Grace said one evening when Benjamin expressed concern. "This is just what happens." "You are only 25, Benjamin pointed out. 25 with 2 small children and a homestead to run," Grace countered. "I am fine, Benjamin. Stop worrying." But he could not help worrying. Grace was his everything, the center of his world, and the thought of anything happening to her terrified him. He took on more of the household tasks, insisting she rest when she could, and slowly Grace regained her full strength. Summer brought good fortune. Benjamin's herd had grown significantly, and several neighboring ranchers approached him about buying stock. The money from these sales allowed him to make improvements to the homestead, building a larger barn and a proper storehouse. He also bought Grace a beautiful rocking chair for the porch, where she could sit in the evenings and watch the children play. It was during one of these quiet evenings, with Sarah chasing butterflies in the yard and Benji asleep in Grace's arms, that she turned to Benjamin and said, "Do you ever regret it? Marrying me so quickly, taking on another man's child?" Benjamin looked at her in surprise. "Never. Not once." "Why would you ask that?" "I was just thinking about how different your life would be if you had not found us that day," Grace said. "You could have married someone younger, someone without complications. You could have had a quieter life." "I could have had a lonelier life," Benjamin corrected. "Grace, you and the children are the best thing that ever happened to me. I would not change a single moment, even the hard ones." Grace smiled and reached for his hand. "I love you, Benjamin Ryder. I know I did not love you at first, but I do now, completely and truly." "I know," Benjamin said, bringing her hand to his lips. "I can feel it every day in the way you look at me, the way you touch me, the way you have made this house a home. You do not need to say the words, though I am glad to hear them." "I should say them more often," Grace said. "I should make sure you know." "I know," Benjamin repeated, "but I will never get tired of hearing it." The years that followed were full and rich. Benjamin's ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the area. They hired help during the busy seasons, and Benjamin built a small bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Grace became involved in the community, organizing church socials and teaching Sarah and other children their letters and numbers. Sarah grew into a bright, energetic child who loved horses and helping her father with the cattle. Benji was more bookish, preferring to stay indoors with his mother, learning to read at an early age. They were different in temperament, but they loved each other fiercely, and Benjamin delighted in watching them grow. When Sarah was 5 and Benji was 3, Grace discovered she was expecting again. This time, the pregnancy was harder, and Doc Brennan warned that it might be her last. Benjamin was terrified throughout the 9 months, but Grace remained calm and confident. Their third child, a daughter they named Emma Rose, was born on a beautiful spring morning. The birth was difficult, and afterward, Doc Brennan confirmed that Grace should not have any more children. Benjamin did not care. He had Grace, had 3 healthy children, had more than he had ever dreamed possible. As Emma grew from infant to toddler, Benjamin marveled at how full his life had become. The cabin that had once been so silent now rang with children's laughter and the sounds of a family living. Grace moved through it all with quiet grace, managing the household and children with seemingly effortless skill. The children knew the story of how their parents had met, how Papa had found Mama and Sarah in the snow. Sarah had been too young to remember it herself, but she loved hearing the tale, making Benjamin tell it over and over. "And then, what did you say?" she would prompt. "I said I would be father and husband both," Benjamin would answer, pulling Grace close. "And I have tried to keep that promise every day since." "You have," Grace would assure him. "You have been the best father and husband we could have asked for." When Sarah turned 8, she asked about Thomas. "Was he my first papa?" she wanted to know. Grace and Benjamin exchanged glances, then Grace sat Sarah down and told her about Thomas honestly. "He was your birth father," Grace explained. "He loved you very much, even though he only knew you for a few weeks. But when he died, God sent Papa Benjamin to take care of us, to be the father you needed." "So I had 2 papas?" Sarah asked. "You did," Grace confirmed. "But Papa Benjamin is your papa in every way that matters. He is the one who raised you, who loves you, who will always be there for you." Sarah thought about this for a moment, then went to Benjamin and climbed into his lap. "You are my papa," she said firmly. "My real papa." Benjamin hugged her tight, emotion clogging his throat. "And you are my real daughter," he said. "Always have been, always will be." The years continued to pass. Sarah grew into a lovely young woman who could ride and rope as well as any of the ranch hands. Benji showed an aptitude for numbers and helped Benjamin manage the business side of the ranch. Emma was still young but showed signs of inheriting her mother's kindness and her father's determination. Benjamin and Grace grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their struggles, as all couples do. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and failed crops. There were arguments and misunderstandings, moments of frustration and fatigue. But through it all, they held onto each other, remembering that they had been forged in crisis and survived. On their 10th anniversary, Benjamin took Grace back to the spot where he had found her. It was summer now, the cottonwood tree green and lush, the snow long since melted. They stood together under the tree and Grace said, "I was so scared that day. I thought Sarah and I were going to die." "I am glad you were wrong," Benjamin said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "So am I," Grace said, leaning back against him. "You gave us everything, Benjamin. A home, a family, a life worth living." "We gave each other those things," Benjamin corrected. "You made me whole again, Grace. Before you, I was just going through the motions. Now every day has meaning." Grace turned in his arms to face him. "You know what I think about sometimes? I think about how many choices had to happen exactly right for us to find each other. If I had left the homestead one day earlier or later, if you had taken a different trail that morning, if the storm had been worse or better, any of those things could have changed everything." "I like to think we were meant to find each other," Benjamin said. "That God or fate or whatever you want to call it brought us together." "Maybe," Grace said. "Or maybe we just got lucky. Either way, I am grateful for every moment." They stood there for a long time, holding each other under the summer sun before heading back to the ranch where their children waited. That night as they lay in bed, Grace said sleepily, "Benjamin." "Yes, love. Thank you for keeping your promise, for being both father and husband, for loving us the way we needed to be loved." Benjamin kissed her forehead. "It was the easiest promise I ever made to keep." As the children grew older and more independent, Benjamin and Grace found themselves with more time together. They would ride out to check on the herd, just the two of them, and spend hours talking and laughing. They took trips to Denver occasionally, staying in hotels and attending the theater, enjoying a taste of city life before returning gratefully to their quiet ranch. Sarah married at 19 to a good young rancher from a neighboring spread, and Benjamin walked her down the aisle with pride and sadness mixed together. She moved only 10 miles away, close enough to visit regularly, and Benjamin was grateful for that. When her first child was born, a boy she named Thomas Benjamin, Grace cried happy tears at the honor to both the men who had shaped her life. Benji went to college in Denver, something Benjamin insisted on despite the expense. He wanted his son to have opportunities, to see more of the world than just the ranch. Benji studied business and law, and Benjamin hoped he would return to help run the ranch, but he would support whatever his son chose. Emma showed no interest in leaving, declaring at 12 that she would run the ranch someday. Benjamin laughed and told her she probably would, given her determination. On a cold January morning when Benjamin was 45 and Grace was 38, they woke to find the world blanketed in fresh snow. It had been snowing all night, and the drifts were high around the house. They lay in bed for a moment, listening to the quiet, and Grace said, "It looks like it did that day." Benjamin knew immediately what she meant. 13 years, he said. 13 years since I found you. 13 years since you saved my life, Grace corrected. 13 years since you saved mine, Benjamin countered. Grace rolled over to look at him, her blonde hair, now touched with gray, spread across the pillow. "I have been thinking," she said, "about everything we have been through, everything we have built. And I realize that what we have is rare, Benjamin, Most people do not get this kind of happiness." "I know," Benjamin said, reaching up to touch her face. "I thank God for it every day. I want you to know," Grace continued, "that marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Even though it happened so fast, even though I did not love you at first, it was right. You were right for me, for Sarah, for all of us." Benjamin pulled her close, and they lay together as the snow continued to fall outside, warm and safe in the life they had built. When they finally got up, they found Emma already in the kitchen making breakfast, and the three of them sat together at the table Benjamin had built with his own hands, in the house he had expanded room by room, in the life he had never imagined he could have. That afternoon, Benjamin saddled his horse and rode out to check on the cattle. The snow had stopped, and the world was pristine and white under a brilliant blue sky. As he rode, he thought about the boy he had been when he first came to Colorado, young and alone and determined to make something of himself. He thought about the man he had become through hard work and perseverance, successful but lonely. And then he thought about the moment everything changed. The moment he saw a woman huddled in the snow, clutching a baby to her chest, refusing to give up even in the face of death. The moment he made a promise that changed both their lives forever. He had told Grace he would be father and husband both, and he had kept that promise with everything in him. He had raised Sarah as his own, loved her as completely as he loved his blood children. He had loved Grace with patience and devotion, giving her time to heal, time to learn to love him back. He had built a home and a family out of desperation and chance, and it had been worth it. Every hard moment, every struggle, every sacrifice had been worth it for the life they had created together. When Benjamin returned to the house that evening, the lamp was already lit in the window, a beacon of warmth in the cold winter twilight. He could see Grace moving around inside, and the sight filled him with contentment so profound it was almost painful. This was home. This was love. This was everything. He put up his horse and walked into the house, where Grace met him with a kiss and Emma with excited chatter about something that had happened with the chickens. Benjamin listened and laughed and helped set the table for supper. And as they sat down to eat, he looked around at his family and felt nothing but gratitude. The years continued their steady march forward. Benji graduated from college and surprised everyone by returning to the ranch, saying he wanted to help modernize their operations. He brought new ideas and energy, and Benjamin was happy to hand over more of the day-to-day operations to his capable son. Emma did eventually take over much of the ranch management, proving to be as skilled and determined as she had promised. She married at 23 to a man who was happy to join the family ranch rather than starting his own, and Benjamin and Grace welcomed him warmly. Sarah gave them 5 grandchildren in total, and they were frequent visitors to the ranch. Benjamin loved being a grandfather, loved watching his grandchildren grow and learn. He would take them riding and teach them about the cattle, just as he had taught his own children. Grace would bake cookies and tell stories, and their home was always full of noise and laughter when the grandchildren visited. As Benjamin entered his 50s, his hair went completely gray, and he moved a bit slower than he once had. But he was still strong, still capable, and he had no intention of slowing down. Grace aged beautifully beside him, her face lined with laugh lines and sun from years of outdoor work, her eyes still bright and full of love. They had been married 20 years when Grace came to Benjamin one evening and said, "I want to plant a garden where you found me, by that cottonwood tree." "A garden?" Benjamin asked, surprised. "A memorial garden," Grace clarified. "For Thomas, yes, but also for the people we used to be. The desperate widow and the lonely bachelor. I want to mark that place as special, as the spot where our life together began." Benjamin thought this was a beautiful idea. They spent weeks planning and preparing, hauling in soil and rocks, planting flowers and a small flowering crab tree. They placed a simple bench under the cottonwood, and on the back, Benjamin carved "Here Love Began," January 1873. It became their special place. They would ride out there on anniversaries and birthdays, sitting on the bench and remembering. They brought their children and grandchildren there, telling the story again and again, making sure everyone knew the history. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the memorial garden for a celebration. Sarah and her family, Benji and his new wife, Emma and her husband, and all the grandchildren filled the space with life and joy. They had a picnic lunch and took photographs, capturing the moment for posterity. As the sun began to set and the family started to pack up, Benjamin and Grace stood together by the bench, watching their descendants laugh and play. "Did you ever imagine this?" Grace asked. "When you pulled me out of the snow, did you imagine we would have all this?" "No," Benjamin admitted. "I imagined giving you shelter, finding you a place to stay in town, maybe helping you get on your feet. I never imagined you would become my wife, that Sarah would become my daughter, that we would build this incredible family." "Life is strange," Grace said, "the way things work out. If you had ridden a different trail that day, I would have died in the snow and Sarah with me. You would have lived out your life alone, never knowing we existed. Instead, we got this. 25 years of love and partnership, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and counting. A successful ranch and a good life. Best decision I ever made," Benjamin said, "telling you I would be father and husband both." "Best decision I ever made," Grace countered, "was saying yes." They stood there as the light faded, holding hands, surrounded by the evidence of their love. Then, Emma called that they were ready to head back to the ranch for the anniversary cake she had made, and Benjamin and Grace followed their family home through the gathering dusk. The winters became harder as Benjamin and Grace grew older, but they faced them together as they had faced everything else. They spent long evenings by the fire, Benjamin reading aloud while Grace knitted, comfortable in the silence between them. They had said everything that needed to be said over the years. Now they could simply be together without words. When Benjamin turned 60, the family threw a huge party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from all over, and Benjamin was overwhelmed by how many lives he had touched. Former ranch hands, business associates, people Grace had helped over the years at church, all came to celebrate. At the end of the night, after everyone had gone home, Grace found Benjamin sitting on the porch, looking out at the land he had worked for so many years, thinking deep thoughts. She asked, sitting beside him. "Thinking about how blessed I am," Benjamin said, "how different my life could have been." "You made your own blessings," Grace said, "through hard work and kindness and choosing love even when it was not easy." "We made them together," Benjamin corrected, pulling her close. "I could not have done any of this without you." They sat together in the darkness, and Benjamin thought about all the years behind them and however many years might be ahead. He hoped for many more, hoped to see his grandchildren grow up and have children of their own, hoped to grow old and gray with Grace by his side. But even if tomorrow was his last day, he would be grateful for the life he had been given. Grace must have been thinking similar thoughts because she said quietly, "Whatever time we have left, I want to spend it just like this. With you, with our family on this land we built together." "That sounds perfect to me," Benjamin said. The years rolled on. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th. Sarah's oldest son took over her husband's ranch, proving to be as capable as his parents. Benji and his wife had 4 children who were growing up strong and smart. Emma's husband died unexpectedly of a heart ailment when he was only 50, and Benjamin and Grace helped her through her grief, understanding from personal experience what she was going through. When Benjamin was 68 and Grace was 61, they decided it was time to hand over the ranch operations completely to Benji and Emma. They would still live in the main house, still be involved, but the daily management would fall to the next generation. It was time to rest, to enjoy the fruits of their labor. On a warm summer evening, Benjamin and Grace rode out to the memorial garden one last time as the active owners of the ranch. They sat on the bench, now weathered with age, and looked at the flowers Grace had planted all those years ago, now mature and beautiful. "No regrets?" Benjamin asked. "Not a single one," Grace said. "None," Benjamin said firmly. "This life, this family, you are everything I ever wanted and more." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Benjamin Ryder. I have loved you for most of my life now, and I will love you for whatever time we have left." "I love you too," Benjamin said. "From the moment I saw you in the snow, I think I knew you were going to change my life. I just did not know how much." They sat there as the sun set, two people who had chosen each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful. When darkness fell, they rode slowly back to the ranch, where lights glowed in the windows and their family waited. Benjamin lived to be 73 years old. He died peacefully in his sleep on a winter morning, Grace beside him as she had been for 40 years. His children and grandchildren mourned him deeply, but they also celebrated a life well lived, a man who had been loving and kind and generous. Grace lived another 5 years after Benjamin's death. She spent that time with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, making sure they understood what kind of man he had been. She visited the memorial garden often, sitting on the bench and talking to Benjamin as if he could hear her. When she died at 66, her family buried her next to Benjamin on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. And carved on her headstone, along with her name and dates, were the words Benjamin had said to her so long ago: "I will be father and husband both." Sarah, now in her 60s herself, stood at her mother's grave and thought about the incredible journey her parents had taken. From desperation in the snow to a love that lasted a lifetime. From a marriage of convenience to a partnership that had been the foundation of everything good in their lives. The ranch continued to prosper under Benji and Emma's management, and then under their children after them. The memorial garden became a family tradition, a place where generations would gather to remember the love story that started it all. Benjamin and Grace's story was passed down through the years, a testament to the power of choosing love, of keeping promises, of building something beautiful out of the most difficult circumstances. And in the hearts of their descendants, the legacy lived on. The cowboy who found a woman in the snow holding a baby, who said he would be father and husband both, who kept that promise with everything in him for the rest of his life. And the woman who said yes, who learned to love him, who built a family and a home with him that lasted far beyond their mortal years. Together, they had created something that would endure, a love story for the ages, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the transformative power of choosing each other, day after day, year after year, until death finally parted them. But even death could not diminish what they had built together, the family and legacy that would carry on their love for generations to come.